So welcome back, everyone. Isadora took a little break, so I am here joined by three panelists, and I'm going to just wing it. So here we are. Just going to introduce you real quick before, and then I want to hear all about your sessions, both the ones that are still going to happen later today, but also the one that you already did. And then we're just going to have a casual conversation about .NET. Right? So Purnima, you're a freelance .NET developer, you're a Microsoft MVP, you're an Umbraco MVP, and you had an earlier session about real-time applications with Azure Web Pops-Up. Do you want to, how did it go? Did you have many questions? Were there good questions?
Yeah, so thank you for having me as a panelist today. My talk went well. It was an interesting topic for me, and I should say this because I really want to say this. The inspiration was Anthony Tu's presentation about static web apps last year at .NET Conf. He spoke about static web apps where he had an epic demo where users could actually come into his demo URL, and then they would use the video stream from their local cameras to project their faces as, or whatever comes in from the camera stream, as ASCII characters. So static web apps, everything was awesome, but what really struck me was this particular service in Azure, and it actually cried out loud to me saying that I have to go check that out and build up a talk around that topic, learn that. I had a fun session. I had someone saying that it was a fun session, which is what I intended for the day. So all good, I guess.
Awesome. I love when one talk is inspired by the other one.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's good. Very cool. Next to you is Isaac. You're Principal Product Marketing Manager at Elastic. And you'll have a talk later today that is called Accelerate.NET to Azure with GitHub Actions.
Yeah.
What inspired that talk?
Yeah, I mean...
Was it also an earlier talk for someone else?
Well, just a little bit of inside whatever. So I've done like a GitHub Actions, .NET, and Azure talk at the last two .NET Confs. And I think that at least me, as somebody who's been somebody that's been, I guess, forced to wear multiple hats, like DevOps is very, very important in the software development lifecycle now.
Yeah.
And talking about three things that I love. I love .NET, I love Azure, and I love figuring out ways to get Azure as quickly as possible, and GitHub Actions is a great way to do that.
Awesome. So, very curious about that.
Yeah.
Very cool. And then next to you, Dylan, last but not least. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself?
Yeah, I never know how to introduce myself. So I'm a .NET developer. I run my own consultancy. I do loads of training. I do loads of conference speaking. I write songs, I play songs. Like when I have to fill out call for papers and it's like company and job title, I put like CEO, janitor, and lead guitar. And if people aren't comfortable with that, I'm not going to fit in any of their boxes.
Anyway, yeah. I noticed last night when there was we had a little speaker dinner and you did a little tune on the piano. I noticed, yeah.
Yeah, it's a nice piano. A little bit. It was in tune with itself, but not in tune with the rest of the world. Like all the most interesting people.
Exactly.
Yeah. So, and yeah, I'm here today. I'm doing the closing keynote session today, which is the history of software in three-letter acronyms, from ACK to ZOI, which is it's going to be fun because it's a kind of interesting structure, and there's some fun little stories and asides and stuff in there. And then Hannes and I will be getting our guitars out and doing a bit of music on the stage as well this afternoon. So
awesome. Oh, that's fun. Yeah.
Fun. Looking forward to
exactly.
it.
Streaming the closing keynote, but not necessarily your talk. So that's why I definitely wanted to hear about the other sessions as well. Awesome. So I want to get started with, let's talk about .NET 6 a little bit. Like what's new, what is exciting, what is maybe controversial. Who wants to go for? I mean, you still have the microphone. You can go.
Want to start this one?
No, you can go for. Oh, sure, why not? Yeah, I mean, .NET 6 for everybody that has been paying attention. A new version of .NET 6 comes out every November, and .NET 6 came out in 2021. Like we're almost halfway through 2022, so .NET 7 is happening anytime, right? But some things that I thought were pretty interesting in .NET 6, especially, we were talking about a bit earlier with like minimal APIs and sort of this idea of making .NET more accessible for like non-traditional, I guess, .NET developers, which I think is pretty cool. So being able to write applications with only a few lines of code, like that's something that's really top of mind to me. Do you want to maybe say something?
Yeah, sure. For me, it's .NET anywhere and everywhere. That is very appealing to me, particularly with Maui coming on board as well. You can have the same .NET running in a lot of places, particularly with the Blazor app model that it has. You can have a web app which runs on a browser, take that same code, ship it into a desktop app or even a mobile app. And I've actually done this, and it was like, wow, this is so cool. Like,
it's very powerful.
It's developer's dream, I would say, at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Dylan, anything good?
Yeah, I mean, I think the thing to me that's interesting about .NET 6 and a lot of the sort of minimalism they're bringing in is, I'm always interested in, let's imagine there's someone who's not doing .NET right now, but this time next year they are. Who is that person? And maybe they're a developer who's coming from somewhere else in the industry. Maybe they've come from doing embedded systems and they want to move more into kind of business applications. Maybe they're a web developer, or maybe they're someone who's not coding yet at all. And no matter how much we as an industry kind of, there's a lot of, people, I don't want to do JavaScript, I'm going to do TypeScript, and then I don't want to do TypeScript, I'm going to do Go and Rust. And we're like, every year there are however many hundreds of millions of people who were not programming at all last year because they were 15 years old or 10 years old or whatever. Yeah. And, I always think every one of these features, I'm like, if I was just seeing this today, the first time I'd ever seen anything. And that's where I think the new .NET 6 stuff is really nice. Like, Hello World is one line of code. Yeah. And it's like, all right, what is console.writeLine? Well, console is probably the console, or at least it was in the 1970s. And WriteLine writes a line. All right, I get it. And, to me, that's a really kind of powerful thing to strive for in the way the language is being designed. Because, 25 years from now, maybe we'll still be coding, but all the code that's going to be being developed, the vast majority will be people who maybe haven't even been born yet.
Yeah.
And so, I think there's a lot of within the industry and certainly within sort of, the open source community around .NET, there's people who are like, I do .NET and I want this thing, and I want .NET and you can't do that because I don't like it and it's going to make my programs ugly. But, we are going to evolve, and eventually, like the dinosaurs, we will die out and something else will take over. And I think it must be a difficult balancing act for the designers to kind of prioritize those two things, but I think they're doing a pretty good job on it. So,
yeah, do we want to dive into that a little bit? Where is you say dinosaurs, like old school .NET users, and maybe like the ones that came in through open sourcing .NET, and people that come to it today, what is that balancing act? What does it look like?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's one thing that's really interesting about .NET in general is because, .NET has like 20 years of life where it wasn't open source, it wasn't community driven. It was, sure, there was the Microsoft MVP program, which is great, but I think there was a lot of, okay, Microsoft built this framework or this tool chain to be able to enable businesses to write line of business applications or customer facing applications, right? And over the last 5-6 years, that's substantially changed, right? Like this whole, being able to have conversation out in the open with the .NET team. Like, it's very, very interesting, that juxtaposition, right, of going from, okay, very, very much enterprise focused, closed source, to now we live in this world where you can literally go into GitHub any day and say, like, oh, like this is what the .NET team is working on right now for .NET 7, right? I think just that mind shift has probably been very, very challenging for folks that have been building .NET apps for 20 years, right?
Yeah.
And I think that, at least from my perspective, it's always going to be a bit challenging in working in tech because the cheese is always moving, right? And I think it's really, really important. Yeah, I think it's really important to just call out the fact that change is challenging for human beings in general. Yeah. And if we can adapt to change in really positive ways, it only makes the ecosystem so much better, right? Like, in my opinion, .NET in the last 5 years, we've seen all sorts of amazing innovation in the last 5 years, comparatively to the last 20 years, right? Like, some of the technologies that have been introduced, like Blazor, for instance, or being able to add gRPC, or, some of these things are really, really captivating to solve business problems, right? At least that's my 2 cents. It's probably longer than people want to hear me talk, but I kind of love to hear your thoughts too.
Yeah, absolutely. I would like to reiterate on your positive changes aspect. Of course, it's a shift when it was enterprise to us going into GitHub, saying what Microsoft is working on. But there's also this big aspect of the users, that is developers and project managers, crying out loud for, hey, this is a requirement we really love to have. And we can see that some of those requests are making it to like currently it has already made it into .NET 6, or maybe even to the forthcoming versions as well, which is quite nice to see. Secondly, as a developer, for me, code is always the best documentation. For me, I feel that the code is out there, it's there for me to read, understand, and take further action upon, which is always fantastic. And every design requirement that you probably see, also everything that you see in .NET has a design requirement. I can go in there and read that and understand why something is done in a particular way, which is fantastic because I can get that knowledge and then pass it on, saying that this is the way it should be done and this is the reason why it has been done in a certain way. So for me, it's all positive in a wide variety of ways, I would say. Of course, there's the aspect of maintaining the open source and then, having an enterprise product out of it. But, there is a balance, and I think that balance can be struck, and it's positive, as he said.
Yeah. I would love to hear his thoughts because, it's his business to, write .NET apps or build applications for customers. How has this whole thing been for you, right?
So, actually, the most interesting exposure to the way this is perceived widely is training. Because, I have my own company, I'm the only one there. So when it comes to building applications, I can use whatever I like as long as I'm comfortable supporting it. But when it comes to teaching, I'll get companies approach me and go, can you come and we need distributed systems training. We've got a team of engineers who've been here since Visual Basic 6. And we've decided our corporate strategy is microservices. So how long will it take you to turn VB developers into microservices? And I'm like, 2 days? I don't know. I can let's start with how many days do you want to spend, and then we'll use them as effectively as we can. And you talk to those people, and it's like, what do you want, and what have you got? And they're like, well, the vision is .NET 6 on Linux with containers deploying into Azure, but actually we're still on .NET Framework 4.5 on premise, and we only have licenses for Visual Studio 2017 or whatever. And it's like, do you want me to teach you how to make the best out of what you got, or do you want me to show you a bunch of stuff you can't do yet?
Yeah.
Realistically, how long is it going to be? And one of the really nice things, you mentioned gRPC there as one of the things we've got, and there are various message queuing libraries, there's .NET Standard, and of course there's REST and GraphQL and all the HTTP stuff, is you don't have to kind of upgrade the whole thing in one go. You can actually say, well, we've got this big legacy application which, let's face it, makes all the money. That's why we can't switch it off. But now we can use, add a gRPC endpoint or something to that, or add a message queue publisher, and then we can start building new stuff over here in a way that gives us much more autonomy around deployment. And it is the one thing that and actually this is a question for both of you as well. The one thing I wondered if they could have done was when they announced .NET Core, should they have called it something else? I think C# as a language, they could have been like, no, this is the new Microsoft Flubber runtime, and it runs C# on Linux. And I wonder whether because I see so much confusion about what is ASP.NET Core. It's like, ASP.NET Core is the runtime for .NET, which used to be called .NET Core, but it's different to .NET Framework. And if you want to install SignalR on .NET, you have to install signalr.net.core, but if you want to install SignalR on .NET Core, you install signalr.core.asp. And, I'd sympathize with that. I'm trying to encourage people, hey, go check this stuff out. So what do you think about that?
Did you practice that?
That whole
run? Did you practice that before? Because that was quite timely. Yeah, I think we all can attest that naming is really hard, right? I think, I guess if you think back at how all the principles haven't really changed with .NET. You're still building desktop apps, you're still building web apps, you're still building apps that run wherever. But I think now just the use cases have changed, and I don't know if changing. I've always joked with people, it's if they called it strawberry shortcake or some other silly word flubber, I think was that's. I totally think that would have been helpful maybe initially. But I think in general, if people are looking for .NET, they Google .NET, and they'll probably run into the .NET Framework versus .NET Core versus .NET versus ASP.NET Core, that issue, right? But I think in general, the syntactics of C# is so synonymous with .NET that I think it would be very, very confusing if they went completely away from the .NET name. That's my personal opinion. I do emphasize a lot, like if you go to YouTube and you search like .NET Framework versus .NET Core, there's a lot of people that made a lot of money on YouTube videos, right? Getting views. So I think for content creators and people that are in the training space, it's probably a huge boon for your business, right? Like having to be able to have those conversations.
Create confusion, sell clarity.
Wow. Always works.
Yeah, probably. But I think in general, like, I like the fact that they at least kind of reprioritize the versioning a little bit. Like, .NET 5 and .NET 6 kind of like, this is the new .NET. And like everything before 5 is, yeah, exactly, right? So I think, yeah, there's probably something to that, but I'd love to kind of hear your thoughts.
So, what is the most difficult thing when it comes to a developer? Naming.
Sure, yeah.
Absolutely.
I think it's already great that there's semantic versioning for .NET. Like, that's already a win, no?
Yeah. So, yes, I find it confusing when I have to speak about .NET Core and .NET 5 and .NET 6 and ASP.NET Core. But you know what? There's awesome content creators who are doing the job for me. That's brilliant. But now, as you said, it's getting more streamlined. So I'm happy to use the word .NET when it comes to .NET, and then ASP.NET Core when it comes to more web-specific stuff. So yes, that confusion still arises. I'm a content creator myself doing all the talks, so I actually get confused. Is it, should I be telling .NET Core or .NET or ASP.NET Core? You know what, I'll just stick to .NET. That's fine. Everyone will understand that for now because it's a single .NET at this point of time.
Yeah.
Yeah, the thing that's really interesting to me is, so like I have a talk that's like, what do I do with my old .NET Framework application, right? And it's very, very interesting being in, like, talking to the audience afterwards, because they come to my talk not to listen to me, but to like give their war stories after the talk, right?
I love that.
Yeah. And it's always just like, we can't make the move to .NET or .NET 5 or even .NET Core because it's too challenging, right? And, I tell people, like, if you have a use case the .NET Framework 4.8 or whatever the newest version satisfies, Microsoft's never going to run out of support for that. So like focusing on like the net new stuff is only important if you're building new applications, right? So if you're building an older application or you're maintaining an older application, more likely, it's very, very important, like, can I take on the risk of like learning this new technology, going through the process of upgrading? Like, it's going to be challenging. So I think that having it all be one kind of symbolic like framework is really, really important, because there is a lot of code that runs in .NET Framework 2.0 that also runs in .NET 6, right? The underworkings, the runtime's completely different. A lot of the device class libraries are completely different, but like a lot of the code still runs.
Yeah.
So I think that's the most important thing to call out, is that there's a ton of functionality that's just available for .NET developers, right? Some of the new hotness, I guess, is not available to .NET Framework, but there's still a lot of stuff that people can do.
Yeah. I think the backwards compatibility of .NET, just like with Java, is incredible. Yeah.
Yeah.
Very
Do you
cool.
have anything you wanted to add at the end?
It's actually going to say backwards compatibility is something Microsoft does ridiculously well. Like, I have Apple, iPhone, and Mac OS devices that are like, oh no, I won't run this because it's 5 years old. And, I can still run software from MS-DOS
Yeah.
in
Right.
Windows 11 by double-clicking the exe, and it goes, oh yeah, I know how to run this. And, that's something that I think people sometimes are like, if they weren't so, committed to backward compatibility, we could have more shiny things. It's like, yeah, but shiny things are not actually as useful. They're just shiny, so.
Yeah. Very interesting. I mean, you called out the November releases, right? So there's another release coming up. What are you excited about? I mean, you could all read about it already. You can follow it. So, like, what are the things that you're excited about?
I think the biggest thing to me is, like, at least how I see .NET 7 is, it's like, it's that next step in the unification of all these different things, right? So, like, starting in .NET 5, like, okay, we're going to start incorporating the mono runtime into things. Because at the end of the day, like, we've been hearing the story about, like, ahead of time compiling forever, right? Because it's available in other programming languages, other frameworks, but it hasn't been 100% available in .NET for ever. So being able to build applications that run really, really small, run really, really fast is really, really interesting to me. That's like the thing. And obviously, you mentioned Maui a bit earlier, like seeing Maui mature into something, it was released last month or in May. we're at the end of June now. So yeah, it was released in May, and watching that mature over the next few months is going to be really exciting to see too. That's me.
The most exciting thing for me personally is that 6 months or 4 months down the lane after a .NET version release, we already have a next version preview 1 coming, and there's all sorts of information coming up. But I want to go back slightly to the open source aspect and the features that people can ask out for. Because recently I did a talk at one of the events, and it was when I submitted the talk, it was an experimental project. But .NET 7 came out with Preview 4, and that experimental project now is actually making its way in as a feature in .NET 7,
which
is
cool.
gRPC JSON transcoding, which actually was quite interesting because it's not only just a new feature in .NET. I think the highlight for me behind that is that it's a feature which was experimental. People adapted to it so well that it made its way into a .NET full-blown feature with its own feature request and support and all of that life cycle. So it's fantastic.
That
to
is
see
very
that.
exciting.
I'm not saying that there's nothing else, but there's a lot of exciting things across the entire.
But that's your
.NET
favorite.
level.
Yeah.
But
It's okay,
to
you
see
can say.
something to see something that's an experimental project.
That
Because
makes it
of
into
the
the
user interest,
yeah.
mature into a feature, that's incredible, I think.
Yeah.
That's great. Yes, sir.
So I saw Mads Torgersen, who's the language designer on C# now, speaking at NDC in Copenhagen a few weeks ago. And he showed off a lot of very cool stuff that is still work in progress. And there's a great site, by the way, it's called sharplab.io, which is a drop-down of every single version of .NET. The current ones, all the branches on the .NET codebase. It builds the entire .NET Core runtime from each branch in GitHub, so you can actually go and run code right in the browser using pre-release and experimental versions and stuff. But the thing that Matt said that I thought was really exciting was that C# and .NET will now both ship every year. We'll get 7 in November, we'll get 8 next November, and if you look at the way the language has, or C# the language has evolved, they've often been constrained by the fact that .NET shipped with Windows. So if you could, the new C# features, if you could get those to work as compiler features that targeted the existing runtime, you could ship them now. But if you needed to change .NET, you had to wait until a new version of Windows was ready to go, and that was always such a frustration for them as a team. And now they're like, no, it's cool. If we need to change the runtime, we'll hit the same shipping date with that language runtime every year, new version. I did see something on Twitter going, can we slow down, please? It's been 6 months, I haven't upgraded anything, and .NET 7 is coming soon, and we maybe a release every 5 years. But 6 is long-term support, and there's code out there on, like you said, .NET Framework 2 that is still running and making money. And the frustration eventually becomes that the tools you have to use to work with it don't have all the nice shiny features that we as developers want. But I'm quite excited. It's always been an interesting. Being in .NET has never been dull, but now it feels like it's exciting for good reasons. So.
Yeah, one thing you mentioned that I thought is really important to call out, right? Especially with the cadence of .NET being it's so accelerated now, especially compared to what it was. .NET 6 is the long-term support version, so you can play on it for 3 years, no questions asked. That means when .NET 7 comes out in November, it means you don't have to move everything over to immediately. You should. I think the upgrade path, they've made it, very robust, but it's not required. Right, so that's the one thing that's really important is that every other year, every even year, or every odd year, there's going to be the long-term support version. Every even year is just the one in the middle, I guess. They have a special name for it. I can't remember what it's called.
So .NET's like Star Trek movies.
Yeah.
The even-numbered ones are good.
Is that true? Is that true? Is that true? Is it like Star Wars movies are like that too? No, or just all? The first 3 are good. The second 3 are kind of good. The third.
Star Wars doesn't do semantic versioning, so I don't know.
No, exactly. That's very true. No, but I think it's really important to call out. It's you don't have to always move to the next thing, right? weigh it out, see if it actually impacts your business or impacts the project that you're trying to build. And if it does, go for it. But you have 3 years of .NET 6. You have the rest of eternity with .NET Framework, right? Like, I think it's important to just remember those two things. And then when .NET 8 comes out, there's going to be 3 years of support after that. So at the end of the day, it's really, really important to just remember, like, there are options without having to upgrade.
Yeah.
Right?
Like that.
Anything you want to add to that?
No, I agree with you on what you said. It's good to keep up to date, but again, it's not actually really necessary as well. Weigh out the options, because tech is always about weighing out the options for me. You choose what is the best for you. It's not necessarily that just because you have a new technology, let's do that. That's not needed. You weigh out the options. But I think what I can say is it's an exciting time to be in tech generally. With all this release cadence and something more predictable as well, and us getting more information of what is forthcoming as well, it's really exciting to be in tech generally.
Well, awesome. On that high note, thank you so much for joining the panel today. Our time is up, unfortunately, but we have a couple of sessions to look forward to still. So good luck with those, and
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.